Well, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Steve Smith, Director of Audits for the LBA. On the first one, Board of Dental Examiners, I think realistically, where we're at in the process with not only the board, but the OPLC, we're looking at probably not a fiscal presentation till September. It's been quite a ordeal and lengthy process to get through this with them. If I can expand on that if the committee would like, but that's sort of where we're targeting right now. Our goal is to have a draft that's been vetted by us internally to the board and OPLC by the end of this month. And it's going to take at least a couple of months for them to get through it. We just received the very last initial response on an observation from the board that was outstanding since, I believe, August. We just got it. So working, as you're familiar with, working with boards, they're volunteers. They only meet once a month. It appears they're only dealing with the audit at these meetings along with the rest of their business. So, and the responses that we're getting are not in the condition that we would like to see in terms of degree of concurrence, coherency, completeness, what they intend to do, remedial action. So we're trying to work with them to get a better product. But so that's kind of where we're at. So any questions on that or? Okay. The next three bullets there: mental health, Department of Energy, and special education. We're going to be, if you would like, we'll present the scope statements that we have prepared, and we can certainly do that. But we're continuing with our planning, and with approval of the scope statements, we'll soon be into field work on those. The last bullet there, the medical subsidy, we had completed our work and we drafted a letter, is what we're calling it, not a report. And we vetted that through Department of Administrative Services and the New Hampshire Retirement System. We just got confirmation from them that they're fine with what we had produced. So now we'll be giving that to Mike Kane for his distribution to legislative leadership. So that's where we stand with that one. So unless there's any questions on any of those, I'll turn it back to the committee. Yeah.
One of the things I would like to see on both mental health and special ed is the reason I guess these topics came up. We see continuing increases in these areas. So if we saw like a 10-year, both number of patients and dollars spent on both of those, especially special ed, and we see a decline in overall students, but seems like an increase in special ed during a 10-year period, and the money, of course, it just keeps going up and up. So I think that would be an interesting piece of those two audits, that we could see what's happening in the progress, and then the question comes, why? And I'm sure that's something that your auditors will be able to find.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think the special education, whatever they're calling it, advocate, may be appointed prior to you finishing your audit. And I think that it's important when we look at dispute resolution as well as costs, that if you have an opportunity to touch base with that new office to see what their thoughts are on where these things should go. I'd
Certainly.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, one of the concerns that I have is in the mental health workforce is what has been referred to me, and I can't verify this, as a seemingly very high number of clinical hours required before certification is achievable compared to other states, and that other states have, if you will, stair steps up to full certification, so that a person that has reached a certain level of hours under supervision can do certain things. I'd certainly like to see something addressing that, whether that's factual, and if so, what are the disparities?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, there are two agencies, NCSO and CSG, that are working on reciprocity for these certifications. Any chance to let us know what's going on there in terms of the licensing of the states, the reciprocity here, particularly in
think-
this area?
Maybe, how about we, take each one of these scope statements individually, and then we can
Okay,
handle them, and maybe some of the background work, someone can, better than I can answer your question.
okay, great,
Sorry.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mental health.
Good morning. My name is Vile Skids. I'll be the auditor in charge of this, the mental health audit. So to answer your question, reciprocity is an area that we are looking at. It's been kind of brought to our attention that mobility of licensure is probably the biggest kind of movement within the entire nation right now. So we are looking at certain reciprocity agreements. We're looking at what are they called? The compacts.
Right.
So there's a psychology compact now, and there are other compacts that are being developed as well. So.
For one question, Mr. Chairman. The Council of State Governments, I know they had a national task force working on reciprocity, and just wondered how far that's going, because that would take care of a lot of difficulties that we see if people could transfer the license. So, yeah.
Sure. Right now, we've been looking at what work has been done through the NCSL right now, but
Yes.
we can certainly add other areas that are looking at reciprocity and mobility of licensure
Okay.
for sure.
I think NCSL and CSG have some cooperation in this area.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
You want to address the hours?
Oh.
For Senator.
Sure. Senator Gaida, if you look in our scope statement, there are a couple of tables in the back. I believe they are pages 4 and 5. We have started looking at some of those hours, and we've looked at the New England states so far. We will be looking at other pockets within the country as well. We kind of envision doing a sample of certain states in the Northwest, in the South, and that type of stuff to look at the number of hours. If you look at New England right now, I have those numbers for practical hours and supervision hours as well. And also to address a comment that you had also made, Senator Gaida, about certain steps within the professions where you can have certain number of hours. Social work has established those steps. It was put into law in October 2021, where there are a couple of lower steps where you can kind of start at, get licensed at that level, and then as you build up your hours of supervision and your hours of practical hours, you can, and education as well, then you can move up to the next steps. So we have started looking at that.
So many of the problems with licensing, that we have excessive requirements, which acts as protection for people who are employed in those areas now. And it calls for legislation to change it. So that's my 16-year observation on eD&A as to what's happening. So, any other questions? Thank you.
Welcome.
Do you want a motion to accept the statement? Do we need to do that at this point?
accept them all at the end. Weatherization. Is somebody going to present something on weatherization?
Good morning. For the record, my name is John Clinch. I'm a senior audit manager with the Office of Legislative Budget Assistant. I believe in your packet you got a copy of our scope statement. I can go through it if you want. Just briefly, the weatherization program is run by the Department of Energy, formerly the Office of Strategic Initiatives in the Governor's Office. And it serves low-income individuals who also qualify for a fuel assistance program and other programs within services that are performed by the community action programs. We're proposing doing an audit scope of did the weatherization assistance program efficiently and effectively monitor the provision of the weatherization services by the community action agencies during state fiscal years 2019 through 2022. With that, I'm open to any questions you may have.
Questions? Thanks, John.
I was going to ask, some of these recent federal programs, have they added a lot of money to this particular program?
The one that I'm aware of was weatherization. They're looking at moving $18 million through the program. The program is normally 1.6 million or so,
Didn't remember
and
that
it's
big.
a significant increase that they're seeing this year. I'm not sure if they've got plans in place for delivering services for that 18 million yet or not, but I know that's in the works.
It'll be interesting if you find that much need, because, you know, all of a sudden somebody's doing the job down the street. Oh, what about me?
Right.
So thank you.
You're
Glad
welcome.
you've taken this on.
Thank you.
Morning, good to see everybody. Paige Lorenz, Audit Manager and Auditor in charge for the Dispute Resolution Audit. Currently, we do not have an Audit Manager assigned to the Special Education Audit overall. As it notes, due to staffing, we have to wait until one of these other audits concludes. So our hope is to do the 6 processes noted under the dispute resolutions first. It's much shorter and we can do it with the current staffing. If there are any specific questions about those processes or dispute resolution in particular, I can answer those.
Are you meeting resistance from any agencies about things with special education?
Well, since neither audit topic has been approved for special education, we've been relying on any public information. We only had a preliminary meeting with Department of Education. So we haven't gotten into the planning stages formally with the background information you have in front of you. What we plan on doing is using the stakeholder surveys that have already been sent out. If we have to do a survey ourselves, we will do that. There's also the advocacy centers that we'll work with and other stakeholders that are identified by the department. I know that you provided us a binder with all the testimony, so we
Right.
were able to review that as well as our preliminary background work.
Do you understand? All the people you're contacting are what the problem has been with special education.
Right,
So
so
you're headed in the wrong direction looking for what the problem is.
So the stakeholders we're looking at, because of the surveys that are sent out, are the people that have used the mediation processes with the schools. We're also looking at the people who have been involved, the parents themselves,
Okay.
as part of it. It won't be limited to the employees or the contracted employees or the advocacy groups.
Have you found any happy people?
There was a few happy testimonies that we got from you. Just a few, but
And I'd appreciate the binder back.
yes, we're confirming that everything's been scanned actually today at the office, so we can give that back to you as soon as we've confirmed we have everything.
Karen?
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
One of the problems with dispute resolution is at the local level. And I know that you probably can't go down to the local level to see what the problem is. But once it reaches the state level, there've been a lot of ugly things that have happened at the local level. And so I don't know how we get to trying to see what kinds of problems are existing before it gets to the dispute resolution.
Sure. So part of it will be the controls that the state has over those processes somewhat at the local level because of the facilitated IEP meetings are not completely state controlled, but they do provide the facilitator and there are requirements. There's also requirements for reporting on alternative dispute resolution processes. So we'll look at how the department determines effectiveness in those areas. We can, with our surveys and potentially interviews, reach out to those people at the local level, get a sample of those people. They're never obligated to talk to us, however, so we can try and gather that information. Yeah.
No? And did you have anything else to add?
I don't. As I said, with the larger scoped audit, it was our understanding it was just a broader issue and a lot of things that the committee wanted to see. So I don't have any specific information on that, just what's here. But any other questions, the department is here if you wanted to ask about the bigger audit or any particulars.
Okay, thank you. So we have three scopes. Do we have three scopes to approve?
Yeah,
Check.
you have the mental health topic, weatherization. Those are a scope statement. They've already gone to fiscal's approved them. So now you're just approving the scope of the audit. The special ed is different in that it hasn't gone to fiscal yet. Though it looks a lot like a typical scope statement. So you could approve the special ed audit. We'll send it to fiscal this month. And if you're fine with what's already written, we could use that as the scope statement and we don't have to come back here. Unless you want us to come back when we do the bigger audit for the scope statement. So that's a possibility.
Let's have a motion on the first two.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And what do we want to say about the special education? Lucy?
I have a suggestion that we sort of bifurcate the thing because it sounds like we've got one piece that's ready to go and ought to go because we know that there are problems there. So my suggestion would be to,
Make a motion.
okay, well, I'm just going to suggest it first before I make a motion so that if heads start going this way, I'll work on it. And if heads go this way, we'll talk about it more. I guess I would move that we approve just the dispute resolution process and wait for more information on the other pieces, because that way we've got something very specific that can get going and then the other pieces can come along behind.
And what are we talking about for the other pieces?
The second audit? The second audit. Hello, my name is Jay Henry. I'm the Performance Audit Supervisor with the LBA. We envisioned the second audit to be more of your typical broad audit that's looking at the whole Bureau and a lot of the functions that they do. But that's going to take more staff and time. So if you see the scope statement, it's broad topics that we're going to look at, especially all the things that you've told us over the last few meetings that you're concerned about, costs of the program and oversight by the Bureau of the local level. So, I mean, I think what you could do is approve this pre-scope statement we get the whole thing to fiscal. And in this scope statement, we talk about more than one audit. We envision more than one audit. So you sort of built that into the system already. So it's already sort of doing what you're suggesting.
Okay.
It's just, we'll do the first audit, the dispute resolution, we're ready to go with that. And when we get staff freed up, we'll be all set to start the second one.
So could I amend my motion to say that I move that we proceed with the dispute resolution portion immediately and with the other portions with all deliberate speed when personnel are available?
Do we have a second?
Second.
And we have a second. Any discussion? Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to somehow try to make sure that the dispute resolution audit gets down to the local level. I don't know how, understandably, they're not required necessarily to answer, but we're wasting our time if we're not getting to really where the problem begins. And so I don't know how we would do that, but I'd certainly be like to see that happen.
That's why we have performance auditors. So they know how to do that.
Yeah, and I think knowing what you'd like us to do, we will, in our methodology, we'll have to write an audit plan, and part of that will be how do we get at the local level, and whether it's, visiting the schools, seeing if we can, we can probably talk to the Disability Rights Center, which has some, as a stakeholder, they may have an inroad to the families that are interested, just like the people that came to talk to the committee.
They might have the fewest complaints.
And we'll also have the record, but hopefully we'll have information from the department of who has used all these levels of dispute resolution. So maybe we'll be able to contact the families through there. We just have to be careful with, it's special ed information and confidentiality, but luckily our work papers are confidential, and our statutes require that we have to be as careful as the department with all that information.
Let us know if you get any pushback. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any objection?
A question while you're pursuing this audit. I look down here at table 1, specific learning disabilities is a 32% of the total. And how lengthy would that list be? Some of the things I've heard at some of the schools are kind of surprising when they talk about some of the specific learning disabilities. And is this a growing list? Are they making up new things every year? And that's the sort of thing I'm interested in. And obviously 32%, it's fairly lengthy list. If there is a complete list, I might like to see that sometime.
Right, and part of the bigger audit is really looking at the data.
Right.
And that's what you're really saying, is how do
Yeah.
they capture this, and how much more detail is there behind it?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we have, for new topics,
On the special ed, would it be possible to list out all of the specific learning disabilities? In other words, give us a comprehensive list of everything, I think along the line with Representative Weiler's concern, so we can see, and maybe a comparative list done from a number of years back and one that's current, just to see what's growing and how and why.
I think we could, someone from the department, that's something that,
it's online, Becky.
Yeah.
There you go.
so the detailed breakdown of that.
That's the same detail that you got with this one is all
Oh,
the last 1 year.
oh, but they're looking for a breakdown of like,
So there's no breakdown of specific learning disability, it's a broad category that changes in a checklist for to determine if they're eligible for a specific.
Could you expand on,
So specific learning disability could cover reading impairment, it could cover math impairment.
yeah.
if there's a checklist, perhaps we could just have a copy of the checklist, and that would give, because I think what the committee's looking for is is a list of what kinds of specific learning disabilities we're talking about, what those diagnoses or designations would be.
So I do have samples. We do not require the districts to do a specific form, but we do review their forms. So we do have samples of every district's form for determining a specific learning disability. I can share that with the audit office, or I can share it directly with you if you would like. It has specific requirements that each team needs to consider as they determine a specific learning disability. But a specific learning disability it can be in any of the processes for reading, writing, math, and we wouldn't know specifically what that is because it's determined by an individual IEP team meeting. We could go through and read every IEP, we have access to those, but we wouldn't know. It's not a determination that they mark off on the box when they determine them specific learning disability. And I'm sorry, Rebecca Burdett, I'm the special ed director for the state.
Thank you, Rebecca. One of the things I recall is I visited a charter school and they pointed out a couple of students that had IEPs for anxiety, which had gone away once they'd come to the charter school. And I'm wondering what sort of treatment you would get for anxiety.
So anxiety would fall under another health impairment, and that it depends on the student, what's causing their anxiety, or what's recommended by the counselor or the physician that has diagnosed them with anxiety, and they might put in accommodations or modifications to provide supports for that student who may have anxiety. It has to be impacting them educationally in order for them to be identified for special education. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I understood correctly what you said, there's no state overarching guidelines for special ed. It's kind of like whatever district or a teacher decides.
Nope. We don't require a specific form. We do have very specific guidelines about how you identify students, what you need for our students. For example, for a specific learning disability, we require that they have an academic evaluation, an IQ assessment is done, an observation is done, and their hearing and vision is screened to rule it out as an issue that may be impeding their learning. So for each of these disabilities that's listed here, there are specific evaluations that the district needs to do to determine if they're eligible. And then the criteria is put forth to them, but we don't say your form should look like this, or we check to ensure that it has the content that it needs, and ensure that it's not a limiting practice. So when you're identifying somebody, you're not saying if they don't have this, they don't qualify, that you're looking at all the factors. And so we check their forms to ensure that they're not limiting and that they do in fact meet the requirements for that disability.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So would there be any benefit to a standardized state form for the purposes of data collection and analysis?
We could do a standardized form if that, it wouldn't be, it would be something that we could add to our information system if that's something that we find that is needed. These are all the disabilities. It's just that the specific learning disability has nuances, and that's not just in New Hampshire. It just has the nuances of you have a disability in how you learn, and it impacts different things. So you have a difficulty in learning math, or you have a difficulty in learning reading, but it's the same type of disability, and that's why it falls under that category.
Thank you.
Just want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last 2 years have been very difficult for students.
Yes.
So we got a situation where we have 2 years of data that are going to be much different than anything that came before. Could we evaluate the effect on kids going forward? It just seems to me remote learning highly problematic, particularly amongst a group of kids not attending school. The absentee rate extremely high.
Yep.
So all of these things I think have to be considered as in that period of time.
Yes, they do. We do look at that in our data, and we're starting to analyze that data. We report a lot of what you're asking for to the federal government. But we haven't really analyzed it before, so we have started to look at those pieces and look at how that impact is. We reach out to districts on a regular basis to see what some of those things is. Absenteeism. I will say that during COVID, the federal government did not allow any allowances in IDA. They had to meet all the same tenets and all the same requirements. So there was no way you could say, no, we're not going to provide this. They had to provide all the same things that they were providing before.
Further question, Mr. Chairman, but they had to chase kids.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
I don't know how successful they were
Yep.
in finding out where these kids were, what was happening, and so forth. That dramatic problem, I know we're the largest school district in the state in Manchester. I know the absentee rate was very high,
Yep.
particularly in certain areas, and I think that's created a very special problem for us going forward.
Yes, it has. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And of course, some of what the senator's talking about stems not from any disability on the part of a student, but those of us from the rural areas had kids who just could not, under any circumstances, figure out any way to get connected to anything, despite a fair amount of effort. So that is a whole nother factor that I'm not sure we can I mean, it's outside of the scope of this, but I think it's important to find. And I will just note one small thing is that I do know of a couple of kids with anxiety diagnoses who actually prospered under the remote learning because the social anxiety that they felt in a classroom was removed, but they were also the kids who were attending regularly, doing the work, taking advantage of what was being offered to them. So it's a whole new ball of wax.
I think, if I may, I think that the repercussions of that will go on for several years because we really won't see the impact in special education for a few years down the road as students start to get back into that. And so I think over the next few years, we will see a larger impact from that.
Thank you. So we have a request for a performance audit of the Education Freedom Account Program. And
I was just going to say I have a list because I put out requests, but that one came back again from several people asking if we could figure out about that. I mean, for one thing, there was the initial assumption of how many people would take advantage of it, and the numbers turned out to be very different, and it would be a good thing to look at.
I also had a request about the immunization program. I don't know if you got any information on that.
I agree. I think that should be looked at. Because I think that we weren't getting all the information.
Could you be a little more, I know a little bit about the immunization program being on Health and Human Services, but are we talking about the state administered program, which is now gone by the wayside? Or, I mean, we'd need to know what aspects we were looking at, would be my point.
There was some thought that we weren't seeing all the adverse effects and that there was some pressure not to report them and that sort of thing, that it was interesting how much was reported in this country versus what was reported in other countries, such as other countries are saying more people died from the shot than from the disease, and yet in this country they were saying, no, everybody that comes to the emergency room hasn't had this shot, which was adverse to what was we're hearing in other countries. So it's odd that those things should differ so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for the LBA regarding HB 1135. Thank you. So in Senate Education, we amended the effective date to push it out further. I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but can you tell me, does that amended future date work better for audit purposes, or would we need to amend it further?
Certainly, I think it's October. I'm not mistaken, I think, was it EDNA, Senate EDNA just approved it last week?
I think
Yeah.
the Senate has approved it.
Yeah, so the date now is October 1st, 2023 is when it becomes effective. So we would begin the audit at some point, either around that time or after. So certainly the longer into the future, the more information, the more data, the more everything we have to evaluate. So certainly an October date is better than the original one, which I think was July.
Thank you.
So,
Um,
and just to, I'm sorry,
that's fine.
just make you aware that this, this is in legislature, so it's a House bill. So normally topics come to us through this committee. But in this particular case, this will be a topic that we will be charged with statutorily if and when it's approved. So we're just making you aware of that.
I'm not as familiar as 1135 as I should be, but what are they asking LBA to audit? I mean, is there something wrong with the program? I mean, I realize that more people applied than we anticipated, but I don't know what the legislation said you should audit.
It's performance audit of the Education Freedom Account program. This should be included, not limited to, initial and continued eligibility, controls for determining qualifying expenditures, identification and recovery of ineligible disbursements, procedures and controls for transferring funds to the scholarship organization, procedures and controls for phase out of the grants, public reporting, participation, student outcomes and expenditures, demographic information about all that.
So that does not sound to me like the education freedom accounts. It sounds to me like the scholarship account, which is totally different than EFAs. And so, this is, anyhow, it's because EFA, the only, the child goes or gets accepted, and if he goes to a regular school, they pay the school. If he homeschools, yes, or she, then, the money is given out. But on the scholarship side, there's a totally different process. So I don't know where this thought process came from, but from what was suggested there, it doesn't sound to me like it's EFAs, but rather whatever they call the scholarship,
CSF.
the scholarship program. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just, maybe we can figure that out, because we don't want you going down this rabbit hole when you should go down this other one. So I just don't know. I just bring that up as a concern.
Yeah, I have the same concern as Representative Umberger. I've sat on Ways and Means for 6 years, and without exception, every 2 years, there's another attack, literally, against these CSFs, I think you call them. The data, they have data every which way. I'm not sure it requires a performance audit, but they have every kind of data on demographics, on amounts, on who gets it, on income levels, and all of that. Ethnicities already available. So I don't know that it requires a performance audit, and I would actually be opposed to that because I've watched the attacks year after year on a very successful program that helps a great number of our less financially fortunate families and children.
Okay, without encouraging debate, yes.
I'm just reading down a list here. So the debate has come from other places. That one sounds like it's not going very far. So The next one actually is kind of interesting, given what you said about the audit of the Board of Dental Examiners. One of the suggestions that I had, and this is something that I hear from people fairly regularly, is that they suggested an audit, and I know we've done any number of the boards, but an audit of the Office of Professional Licensure itself. And this is partially because it's a freestanding entity with no actual oversight over the oversight. We have complaints from various boards who feel that the Office of Professional Licensure, the umbrella organization, impinges on some of the things which the boards feel is their purview. So that's the feedback that I'm getting. And I know that this topic came up at one point when the office was being completely reorganized, and we decided at that time that we didn't want to do an audit because they were being completely reorganized. It would be counterproductive. But I wonder if this is the right time to bring that issue back up. So that's my second one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not for the sake of being obstinate, but OPLC is still in a state of significant transition. And there's been a lot of this. Very clearly, the legislation that I've been working on for 6 years now with OPLC continues to happen. We have several bills, 2 this year, that are still reshaping OPLC and its obligations and responsibilities. I think an audit at this point would be premature. It's been very clear that the OPLC's purview is the administrative oversight of the actual application process, that they have no say in the actual board certification requirements and things like that. But that's still being worked out in legislation. I think it would be premature at this point.
If I may. I wonder if a performance audit might help in the working out process, just because of how people are relating to each other, and whether the direction that I think most of us share of that concept of one's administrative and one's substantive. But as we all know, those two things blend into each other a lot. And I wonder if it wouldn't be helpful to have professional auditors take a look at that to find out, particularly across a spectrum of boards, how that's being implemented, and it might help the process going forward. But if it's the will of the committee to wait, it's the will of the committee to wait.
Let's make sure that's on the next agenda.
Yeah, if I may, with the pending Board of Dental, obviously a big piece of that we've looked at is OPLC operations and how it interacts with the board, the understanding each party has of the responsibilities of each other, as well as just the overall control structure, which whether it's going to be, you'll be able to get a sense as to how it interacts with several of the boards, but specifically the work is with the Board of Dental. So one of the reasons that this report is going to be very large and voluminous is that OPLC does play a big part of it, and there will be there's many recommendations, observations specific to the OPLC in this, and so I think that you will get a sense from our perspective of the OPLC with this report.
So, Mr. Chairman, could I suggest that we just keep this on the list as something that shows up in our list of things to think about, and wait until that audit has come out and then revisit it at that time?
Right, so we'll just put it on the agenda.
Right.
We'll either talk about it or not.
I think 2 more. One is a suggestion about the Secretary of State's Division of Archives and Record Management. And my understanding is that the individual who has been the acting director of that for about 12 years without having ever been the director, and about whom the person who asked me about this spoke very highly. But he thought that it might be a good time to look at that just in terms of policies and procedures going forward, and taking a look at where we are now and where it might be helpful in where we go in the future. So that's one I'd love to have added to the list if there's any other interest in it. And then my final one is, and I'm not sure even how you do this, but the topic was presented to me as public lake access for the public. How does the public access our public bodies of water, and that whole area? And I have no, I don't have anything except the Connecticut River in my district, and so it's not an issue I've thought about a whole bunch. So I don't know even who the people are who deal with that sort of thing, but I wanted to bring that up as an issue because I certainly know that I sit in the House and listen to people when there are issues of lake access. They're always really interesting topics. So I wonder what we're supposed to be doing about getting the public to public bodies of water and how we're doing with it, I think was the question.
Yeah, there's actually, I sit on a board called the Public Water Access Advisory Commission. And this is what we deal with. So it might be appropriate to reach out to the commissioner or the head, I should say, the chair of that commission. And I'm sure that would be a valuable information source. His name escapes me at present because it doesn't meet all that often, but that would be a good resource.
I think Fish and Game has it in the budget.
They're in charge of that.
Okay. I think we've covered the agenda. Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to express my appreciation to the auditors, the performance auditors specifically. I appreciate all the work you do. I find it very enlightening as we do legislation and budgeting. I know you don't hear it often enough, but you do great work, and I appreciate reading it. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of the division, we appreciate that, Representative. So,
Okay, we're all appreciated. The next meeting will be at the call of the chair. And
Move to adjourn.
we are adjourned.